Hi, fifth graders. Today's video is all about estimating with decimal numbers. And remember, when you're estimating, you're not worried about finding the exact answer, but instead you're trying to come up with an answer that's close. So estimating with decimals is going to help us come up with a reasonable prediction for our sum or difference. This way, when we actually solve the problem, we have a better idea of if our answer is going to be close before we have to worry about trying a different strategy to solve the problem another way. And speaking of strategies, I have two suggestions for ways that you can estimate with decimals. So let's look at the example 2 and 73 hundredths plus 1 and 6 tenths. The first strategy I'm going to suggest is something called front-end estimation. And front-end estimation is basically a fancy way of saying you're using some rounding skills. So the first thing you'll need to do is you'll need to round to your greatest place value position. In both 2 and 73 hundredths and 1 and 6 tenths, my greatest place value position is the ones place. So I'll start by looking at the 2 in 2 and 73 hundredths, and in order to round that, I have to look at the digit exactly to the right of it. That 7 tells me I need to round the 2 up. So 2 and 73 hundredths rounded to the nearest 1 is going to be 3. I'll do the same thing with 1 and 6 tenths. So the 1 is in the greatest place value position. I need to look at the digit directly to the right, which is a 6. The 6 tells me I need to bump up that 1 or round it up to the next whole number. So that means 1 and 6 tenths would round to 2. Finally, we'll add or subtract those numbers to get an estimate of, in this case, the sum. So 3 plus 2 means my answer is going to be close to 5. Let's take a look at a subtraction example. This time I have 93 and 6 tenths minus 11 and 43 hundredths. In both of these numbers, my greatest place value position is the tens place. So first, in 93 and 6 tenths, I'm going to focus on the 9, and in order to round that, I need to look to the 3. The 3 means we're going to round down. So 93 and 6 tenths rounded to the nearest 10 is 90. In 11 and 43 hundredths, I have to look at the first digit 1. Then, in order to round it, I need to look at the 1 that's directly to the right of it. Since 1 tells me to round down, 11 and 43 hundredths rounded to the nearest 10 would be 10. So if I subtract 90 minus 10, my difference should be close to 80. Let's take a look at one more. In this example, I have 12 and 4 tenths plus 9 and 2 tenths. This time, in my first number, my greatest place value position is the tens place. So I'll look at the 1, and then I'll use the 2 to help me decide how to round it. Since 2 reminds me to round down, that means 12 and 4 tenths would be rounded to 10. In 9 and 2 tenths, my greatest place value position is the ones place. So I'll look at the 9 in the ones place, then the 2 that's right next door will help me decide how to round. Since 2 rounds down, that means 9 and 2 tenths would be rounded to 9. So I can add those together to get 19. I wanted to show you that example because in the first two, our greatest place value position in both numbers was the same. But in this third example, we had a different place value position for our greatest place value position in each number. That's okay. You can do that either way. So the first strategy to estimate with decimals is using front-end estimation or rounding. Let's take a look at a second strategy you could use. A second strategy to estimate is using something called benchmarks. And benchmarks, remember, are friendly numbers that can help us get a little bit closer to what the exact answer will be. So let's imagine a number line that goes from 0 to 1. Now, we've talked a lot about how decimals relate to money. So I would suggest when you're trying to remember your benchmarks, think about quarters and how you would split up $1 into those change pieces. In other words, 1/4 is 25 cents. So one benchmark you could use would be 0 and 25 hundredths. 2/4 is 50 cents, or half of a dollar. So another benchmark you could use would be 0 and 5/10, or 0 and 50 hundredths. And finally, 3/4 is 75 cents. So another benchmark you could use would be 0 and 75 hundredths. These are the most common benchmarks you can use because they're really easy for us to remember if we think about money. So let's again look at that example, 2 and 73 hundredths plus 1 and 6/10. But this time, let's use the benchmark strategy to estimate. With the benchmark strategy, you're first going to underline the decimal part of your number. So in 2 and 73 hundredths, that's the 73 hundredths part. And in 1 and 6/10, that's the 6/10 part. Then you'll need to think, what familiar number is it closest to? And this is where I suggest thinking about money. So imagine that 2 and 73 hundredths is like saying $2.73. Is it closest to 25 cents, 50 cents, 75 cents, or your next dollar? Same thing with 1 and 6/10. Think about that 6/10 part and figure out what familiar number is it closest to. Then round your number to that nearest benchmark. 2 and 73 hundredths is really close to 2 and 75 hundredths. And 1 and 6/10 is really close to 1 and 5/10, or 1 and 50 hundredths. I can add those two together now to come up with my estimate. That means my answer will be close to 4 and 25 hundredths. Let's take a look at a couple more examples of this strategy. This time, let's look again at the subtraction problem, 93 and 6/10 minus 11 and 43 hundredths. Again, you'll start by underlining the decimal part, which is the 6/10 and the 43 hundredths. Then, think about what familiar number you're closest to. And again, I suggest thinking about this like money. In 93 and 6/10, I come really close to 93 and 5/10. I'm only 1/10 away. And in 11 and 43 hundredths, if I'm thinking about that like $11.43, that's really close to $11.50, or 11 and 5/10. I can subtract those two numbers to give me an estimate of 82. Let's take a look at two more examples using this strategy. Let's look at another addition example, this time 3 and 97 hundredths plus 6 and 12 hundredths. Start by underlining the decimal parts of your number, which are the 97 hundredths and the 12 hundredths. Then think about what familiar number we're closest to. Again, that money tip will be really helpful. Round those numbers to the nearest benchmark. So 3 and 97 hundredths, or if you think about it like $3.97, is really close to the next whole number. So I would round that up to 4. And 6 and 12 hundredths is pretty much in the middle of $6 and $6.25, but the 12 is going to actually have us round down. So I would round that number down to 6, which means my estimate would be about 10. One more subtraction example, 24 and 36 hundredths minus 20 and 19 hundredths. Underline the fractional parts or the decimal parts in each of these. Then think about what familiar number you're closest to. In 24 and 36 hundredths, I'm only 11 hundredths away from 24 and 25 hundredths. And in 20 and 19 hundredths, I'm only 6 hundredths away from 20 and 25 hundredths. So if I subtract those, my estimate would be 4. Either strategy will work for helping you find a reasonable prediction of your sum or your difference. Find whichever strategy works best for you, and you can apply that to any adding and subtracting decimal questions. Thanks for watching the video. Have a great day, everyone.